No, I'm done.
Dude, well done. So now that Prater was unsuccessful from 70 yards, Finkel rolled over to potentially win the competition and save me from an ice bath. All right, here we go. A little bit of train horn for good luck and good measure. And this is where Matt got a little taste of Finkel's true range of motion.
Whoa. Okay.
This was about 80% full power for him. That's all you gotta do, dude. That's all you gotta do. 3, 2, 1, hit it! Go, baby, go! And so even with the terribly inefficient launch trajectory, we'd settled the question of man versus machine. That's my boy! That's my boy! Finkel! The hang time, though, right?
So high. I didn't think it was gonna get there. It went like straight
I
up.
know. But since Finkel had made the trip all the way out here, we decided to keep going and try his foot next at an 84-yard field goal, which is an even 20 yards past the NFL record. But first, we wanted to try and figure out the foot speed of Finkel versus Prater. So we recorded a few kicks in slow-mo with a checkerboard background behind it. This is a trick I learned while at NASA that they've used for ages, because if you know the size of each of those squares, it allows you to watch back the clip and tell the speed of any moving object in the footage by converting grid boxes per second to miles per hour. So when you do this, you find Matt's foot is moving at an insane 48 miles per hour, which puts him right up with the elite place kickers and soccer players. The robot's foot, however, is traveling more than 30 miles an hour faster at a blazing 82 miles per hour. We also measured the ball speed after contact, and while Prater is at 80 miles per hour, which is again insanely fast, the robot clocks in at 120 miles per hour. And that checkered background speed trick is so cool that I invented this. I call it the 40-mile-an-hour blanket because it's a real soft, functional blanket on one side, but the other side has these squares that are sized just right so that if you film in slow-mo on your phone, the math works out perfectly so that you just count how many squares it travels in exactly 1 slow-mo second, and that's how fast it's moving in miles per hour. So for example, if I film this Nerf dart in slow-mo, then I play it back and just count the squares it crosses in 1 second, in this case it's 28 squares, then we know it was traveling 28 miles per hour. And just to prove this approach works, we used a radar gun to check our answer and it came up with the exact same speed. And so it turns out I throw a Nerf football at 15 miles per hour and I can do a short sprint at 12 miles per hour. There are 40 total squares, which means you can measure anything up to 40 miles per hour with 1 blanket. But if you get 2 blankets, then you can unlock the achievement to measure things up to 80 miles per hour. And if you get 16.7 million of them, you can measure the speed of light. And it's not just a speedometer. And a cozy blanket you can put on your bed, but the back is solid blue, which works great as a green screen for filming or for video call background replacement. And a very limited quantity are available on my relatively new website, markrober.com, where every single dollar of anything I sell goes right back into making builds and videos like this one. And even if you're like, I got plenty of blankets, Mark, I put all the critical square spacing info on the website so you can construct your own grid and still have fun with the science. And so now that we knew Finkel could blast these balls at 120 miles per hour, here was his first attempt from 83 yards, although still not quite at full power, and I'll explain why in a second. Okay, a little bit of horn. Now we're ready. 3, 2, 1. And when you see this, these balls were no Deflategate Brady specials. These were the most inflated footballs I'd ever handled. You could barely dent them in with your hand. It's just the pressure from the robot foot was that high. The first kick had the worst possible trajectory, and so the hang time was hilarious. We had quite a bit of energy up in the air. I think we need to optimize this a bit. But straight is a gosh darn arrow. So for the next one, we arranged the foot to contact higher up on the ball so it wouldn't pop it up so much, but still not a full power kick. Go! Please! But this one was just short because it knuckleballed and didn't pop up high enough. So now we knew exactly where to strike the ball to split the difference between those two, and we figured we might as well leave it all on the table and go full throttle. Which makes now a great time to explain why we weren't just doing this on every kick. On our last trip to the practice field, we were totally dialed in, as you can see here. I mean, that thing is suborbital. As a reminder, this is a 60-yard attempt. This is only 4 yards shy of the NFL record, and as you can see, we've got a little room to spare as we pass through the uprights. So then just for fun, we opened it up and sent all 2 tons of spring force through the machine and into the ball, which is when this happened. We're just going absolutely full, all of the power.
What? Oh my God. Yes!
If you watch that clip back, the ball landed here, but it had the height to clear the uprights right here. And you'll notice that's right above this unique pattern in the cement. And from the satellite view, that unique pattern is right here. Now we were kicking from the 50-yard line, so the question is, what is that distance? Well, if we borrow this convenient 100-yard measuring stick, then that kick would have gone through the uprights with no tee and a slight headwind from 105 yards away. Now this is a bit of a good news, bad news situation, because on one hand, the ability to max out the robot and kick 105-yard field goals is amazing. But on the other hand, on the very next kick, this happened.
Done for today.
Basically, we sheared the key in the key shaft because of the whole 2 tons of spring force thing. And in case you're unfamiliar, this is the key. It's just a chunk of metal that gets wedged in here so that when the key shaft turns, the sprocket turns with it. So the final improvement would have been to swap the key shaft with a spline shaft because those distribute the load evenly among many surfaces as opposed to just one. Unfortunately, those spline shafts had a 2-week lead time and we were flying to Detroit a few days after this.
Bryce Finkel from 83 yards, full power plus a little more. 3, 2, 1.
Watch Finkel's head here. I'm sorry, buddy. And sure enough, it was the key that was the culprit.
Keys aren't supposed to do this. Like that. Bonkers.
And so despite the explosive finale, I'm calling this a dub. Not only did Robot Ray Finkel beat the NFL record with a 70-yard kick at sea level with no wind, but he did it at 80% power in a super inefficient kick trajectory. On top of that, even though he lost a couple freaking legs in the process, he showed he's capable of bombing a 105-yard field goal into a slight headwind right off the turf with no tee. And so with all that, honestly, I was willing to let Prater off the hook, because an argument could be made that I technically sort of cheated. But his son Pax was already way too excited about the prospect, which I thought was just fantastic, until it turned out he got off easy by comparison.
2, 1.
This is me reclaiming my title for the world's largest and tallest elephant toothpaste experiment. And this is a totally different kind of reaction we discovered in all our experimentation called Devil's Toothpaste, which is insanely reactive and super dangerous. I'll explain why in a minute, but for now, here's a hint. And if you look closely in both shots, I'm not holding the trigger. This kid is. In fact, that kid was the whole reason we were there at all, because this was a culmination of 8 months of planning to throw him the most epic birthday party ever. And all of this started inadvertently from a single surprise phone call. What's up, Fletcher?
Oh my God.
What's going on, buddy?
What?
How are things, man?
They just got better?
This is Fletcher. And this is also Fletcher a year before this call, but unbeknownst to everyone at the time, also pictured here under all that amazing hair was a fast-growing brain tumor. They eventually realized something was wrong and discovered it was a dangerous form of brain cancer so rare he was only the 6th kid ever known to have had it. So his family uprooted their lives for a year and moved almost 1,000 miles to be closer to St. Jude, where they removed the tumor and would try and fix his brain. In fact, our call was the night before he was going back in for another brutal week of chemo. He's such a funny kid, and I was so inspired by his hopeful attitude that after talking for an hour, I secretly vowed that if he made it to 13 years old, I would fly him and his family out and surprise him with just the dopest birthday party ever. And not long after, I texted Fletcher this picture. So he knew we had closely matching hairstyles, but what he didn't know is that plans were already underway for him and I to take back the record for the world's largest elephant toothpaste. And as a quick refresher, last summer, my buddy Science Bob and I set the world record for for elephant toothpaste by filling up an empty swimming pool. I wanted to be able to swim in the foam afterwards, so we figured out how to use yeast as the catalyst, which is in fact safer, but it doesn't react very fast. And our video seemed to inspire some folks, because 2 months later, this happened in David Dobrik's backyard, where they didn't bother with the yeast and just took the normal reaction and scaled it up a bunch. But then a few weeks later, these guys in Brazil did the largest experiment yet, and they are the current Guinness World Record holders. And so even though Fletcher's birthday was still 8 months out, we started our testing right away, because I knew blasting a world record amount of foam straight up into the sky wasn't as easy as it might sound. And the part that concerned me the most was picking the right nozzle size, and here's what I mean. These three containers are identical except for the diameter of their outlets. If that diameter is too large, it looks kind of cool, but it doesn't really go that high. Too small, and it will go high, but it just looks like confetti and doesn't look that impressive. But for every container, there is a Goldilocks size diameter opening that gives you that cool laminar looking flow while still going pretty high. And you might think, well, why don't you just take a typical flask that works so well and just scale all the dimensions up? And we tried that on our first 5-foot scale test. And just as I feared, it went all confetti on us. And the problem is illustrated here. If you want to scale up and double all the dimensions of the block, you get this. It's perfect. All these dimensions increased exactly by a factor of 2. But wait a sec, the volume increased by a factor of 8. This is called the squared cube law, and its effects are everywhere in nature, such as putting a hard limit on just how big land animals can be. Because how heavy you are is a function of your volume, but the strength of your muscles and bones is a function of their cross-sectional area. So since animals evolved to get heavier by the power of 3, but stronger by only the power of 2, at some point, it's just too much. So on the next 5-foot test, we increased the top diameter by a mere 3.5 inches. But now the pendulum swung too far the other way because while the column looked smooth, it didn't really go that high. And so finally for the third test, we let the pendulum swing back just a tad and shave down that diameter by just over an inch to try and dial in that Goldilocks outlet size. And sure enough, the column went really high and looked great. But this test uncovered another issue. With such a high volume of foam, the pressure was creating some really high forces in the flask. I mean, that's a lot of damage, which quite frankly left us with only one option. And so with the power of flex tape, we scaled things up even further to a 10-foot test and did our best to interpolate that Goldilocks outlet size. So once again, the outlet size worked great, but our joint construction wasn't prepared for the further scaled up forces. In fact, score a fat W for the flex tape, where you could see it single-handedly held the thing together, even as the screws and wood busted through. And we were realizing we just had to make the structure so over-engineered and indestructible, so the only option for the foam to escape the high pressure would be going out the top. And so while that wasn't a perfect result, I felt like we'd learned enough from all of our failures to design it strong enough for the final 20-foot world record version. In the end, we ran over 150 tests, not only to determine the right scaled up flask dimensions, but things like, does neck length have an effect? What happens if you vary the soap amounts? What effect do different brands of food coloring have? All of these tests were really insightful, but perhaps the most interesting finding was stumbling upon something I've affectionately named Devil's Toothpaste. Now you might be thinking, Devil's Toothpaste? That seems a bit extreme, Mark, but allow me to demonstrate. This is a shoebox full of the standard formula of hydrogen peroxide, sodium iodide, and soap that pretty much everyone uses to make elephant toothpaste. Now here's the same volume of reactants, only this time using Devil's Toothpaste. Now see if you can spot the difference in real time. Not only is it hyperreactive, but the reaction is much hotter, so you get these really cool bubble formations. Here's one more. Once again, this is normal elephant's toothpaste in an Erlenmeyer flask. No big deal, people have been doing this for years. But once again, here's the same volume of reactants, now only with Devil's Toothpaste. Given how explosive this is, this may be irresponsible of me, but while we watch the replay, I'll tell you exactly how to make it. You start with 2016. Once that mixes, you're gonna Oprah Winfrey. torch on the leftover rabbit fur, and you're good to go. And so by taking some rigorous safety precautions, we also intended to set the first and therefore only world record for the world's largest devil's toothpaste experiment by filling 6 55-gallon drums with 400 times the amount that broke the flask here. And so after 150 tests and 8 months of work, feeling much more confident about our build plans and chemistry, we packed everything up